Welcome to the show and welcome to White Bear, Red Sun. This is pre-dreadnought naval battles for the Russo-Japanese War. These are pretty simple fast play rules. I'll go through a few of the basics before we kick off. Firstly, ships' stats. They have various classes, obviously, battleships, armor cruisers, protected cruisers, etc. They all have a cruising speed, a maximum speed, an attack factor, defense factor, and a maximum range for guns, which is in inches. In order to move your ships, squadrons or fleets, you'll need action points. So at the beginning of each turn, 1d6 will ascertain how many of those you have. If you're in a formation, they can all use the same action point. When ships fire at each other, they use their attack factor versus the target's defense factor. A few obvious additions or subtractions accordingly, and the resulting damage is indicated here. So the severity increasing traffic light system is pretty basic, and I'm sure you'll get the gist as you watch. With regards to the two antagonists, the Russian fleet will be led by Admiral Vladimir Pissov. He has under his command two divisions of ships, the battleship division Borodino, Imperator Alexander II, and the Sissoi Veliki, which, as she is obsolete, has a lesser gunnery range and is not as fast. The cruiser division consists of two armoured cruisers, the Admiral Nakhimov and Bayan, and one protected cruiser, Izumrud. The Japanese fleet is led by Admiral Wasabi Itchicrotchi, and he's a good admiral, so therefore will get a bonus when he's rolling for his action points. He also has two divisions, one of battleships, which consists of the Fuji, Mikasa and Shikishima, and the cruiser division is Idzumo, Naniwa and Chiyoda, and the latter is obsolete. This is not a historical scenario, so the victory conditions are that if one fleet has half the number of its ships, silenced, crippled or sunk at the end of a turn, that is it. We're on the high seas. The Japanese fleet will be entering the table from the top left as you look, with the Russian fleet coming in from the bottom right. It clearly doesn't affect sailing, but the wind is coming from the bottom of the table and may have an effect on smoke obscuration for firing. There's the Russian fleet, line astern, the cruiser Izumrud at the rear, Bayan, Admiral Nakhimov, and then the three battleships, Sissoi Veliki. This obsolete one here is going to struggle, I think. Then we have the Imperator Alexander II and the flagship Borodino with Admiral Pissov, and they're on their way to meet the Japanese. And here is the Japanese fleet, the battleships on the left as we look, led by Fuji with Admiral Itchicrotchi. Then we've got the Mikasa, and then Shikishima, and the cruiser squadron here. We've got Idzumo, Naniwa, and the obsolete Chiyoda bringing up the rear with the Saki and the gear. So we are off and running with initiative. The red is the Japanese and the Russians are the white. So the Russians will be going first. Battleship squadron gets 2 action points. Probably doesn't matter so much at the beginning when they're not going to do much manoeuvring. And the cruiser squadron just the 1. Now cruising speed for the battleships is 4 and it is 6 at max speed. But if they want to stay together as a squadron, unfortunately because Sissoi Veliki is obsolete, they can only go a maximum of 4, therefore the whole squadron will go at 4. Already a weak link. And at this stage the cruiser squadron will just follow up behind. Battleship squadron gets 3 action points and cruiser squadron 6. So I think the Japanese will immediately try and cross the T. They will turn, which is 1 action point, but that counts for the whole formation. They will also pay another action point to go max speed, so they go 6. The rest of the formation just follows on, whereas the cruiser squadron will pay 1 AP to go max speed, which for them is 7. Already we can see the Japanese manoeuvring, and they're going to try and cross the Russian T. Well, they're not going to allow that. They will turn to their starboard in a moment. Right, initiative goes to the Japanese. And in these rules, the initiative winner can elect to go second, which is what they'll do. So the Russians are off first. So the battleship squadron are going to turn. You've got to turn before you move, and they will go there 4. Should have rolled action dice. They only had 1 action point anyway for the battleship squadron, and the cruiser squadron also only gets 1. They will continue on the same course. Right, now the Japanese will know what the Russians are doing. Battleship APs, they get 4, and cruisers get 3. So I think the battleships again are going to turn. This is 1 AP, and they'll use a second one to go there, 4-6 again, and the cruisers will also use 1 action point to continue to go at their maximum speed, which is 7. I think we'll be getting action fairly soon. Initiative is the Russians. Right, Battleship Squadron has 4 action points and Cruiser Squadron 3. They will get the Japanese to go first. So Battleship Squadron gets 4, Cruiser Squadron just the 1. Okay, I'll do the cruisers first. They'll continue with their fast cruise, max speed rather, and the battleships will probably turn to starboard at max speed again. Although the Russians pass the manoeuvre over to the Japanese, they will be firing first. So they need to do a slight turn to port and trundle up cruise speed. And the cruisers will just follow on behind. They need to break out and do something different in a moment, I think. Gunnery. Well, the only 2 ships that are in range at the moment is the Borodino and the Fuji. Borodino will open fire. So the attack factor is 4 for the Borodino, defence is 5 for the Fuji, but unfortunately it's over 12 inches, therefore it's a -1. So it's +3 to Borodino, +5 to Fuji, which is 7-6. Attackers total greater than targets, 1 level of damage. Fuji immediately picks up that. So that means all firing is at -1, and she cannot recover that damage during this game. She will fire back. +3 versus +5. 7, 10, no effect. And that is the end of turn. So first blood to the Russians as the Borodino does some damage on the Fuji. Itchicrotchi is getting worried. Right, initiative is with the Russians. They will get the Japanese to go first. Action points for battleships, they get 4, and the cruisers will get just the 1. Well, Itchicrotchi will just go on cruise speed here, no change of direction. And same for the cruisers. Right, over to Pissov. Battleship Squadron has 2 action points, and the cruisers will have also 2. But they will just continue on their merry way cruise speed. And the cruisers will turn to starboard and also continue cruise speed. So Borodino will open fire here against the Fuji again, this time supported by Imperator Alexander. So the supporting ship will give +1, which will cancel out the -1 from the long range, +4 attack, +5 defence. That's no effect. Fuji will fire back at Borodino, supported by Mikasa here. Just the -1, so it's 3-5. So that's no effect. 4-8. Just measured the range, and the Izumo is also in range of Borodino. She'll be on 3, Borodino on 5. Which is 7-7. That's a draw, so it's hit. And a hit means that all firing is at -1 for the turn, but that was the last firing in the turn, so therefore it's no effect, and it is removed at the end of the turn. Unlucky. Initiative stays with the Russians, and they will get the Japanese to move again. Right, Battleship Squadron has 1 only, and the Cruiser Squadron, both only 1. So the Japanese cannot do a great deal, but I think they've got to turn, otherwise they'll be off the table, which you can't do in this game. So they'll come slightly to their port, and they can only go cruise speed. Cruisers will just continue on the same course though, at the same speed. They're positioning themselves nicely to take on the front of the Russian Battleship Squadron. So at the moment it's a bit of a pincer movement on the Russians. Battleship Squadron has 6 APs, and the Cruiser Squadron will have 4. Well, I think it's more of the same from them. Slow and steady does it. Well, I think the cruisers will get a spurt on. They'll go 7. Right, Russian gunnery. Now in this game you can only have 1 ship being fired at a time. So these 2 will be firing at matey there, Fuji, and Borodino will be firing at Mikasa. Again, the range still quite a way. So for the Russians it's 4, -1 for the range, but +1 for support. So he's back to 4, and defensive of 5, 4-5. Which is going to be 10-7. Win by 3. Attackers total greater than targets. Yes, 1 level of damage. Oh dear, oh dear. The Fuji's up to silenced. And silenced means no firing, -1 to defensive factor, and they've got to roll a 3+ on morale, otherwise they run away. Ooh. And they have to turn away. Right, I've got to remember that. Next turn, they are off. They also need 3 action points to repair the damage. Now the Borodino will open fire on the Mikasa. It's a straight +3 for the Russian and +5 for the Japanese. And that is no effect. Right, because the Fuji now can't fire, we'll have to get these 2 ships to fire at the Borodino. There's going to be 4 for the Mikasa with the Shikishima supporting, and 5 for the Russian defence. That's no effect. And finally to the Japanese cruiser squadron, Izumo will open fire, supported by Naniwa. They're going to be firing at Borodino. It's 4-5. Which is 7-6. And the Borodino is damaged. Initiative is massively with the Russians. Interesting. Battleship squadron gets 2 action points and cruiser squadron 3. Well, I don't think the Russians are going to do too much, apart from perhaps just turn a tad to port and go a standard cruise speed. Whereas the cruiser squadron will also go cruise speed but turn to their starboard. Japanese, 4 action points for the battleships and 1 for the cruisers. Right, battleships first. Old Matey's got to turn and go. And Mikasa and Shikishima will continue on that course, going cruise speed. So with the Japanese cruiser squadron, just with the 1 command initiative, made a mistake earlier. Chiyoda should only be going 5 on a maximum speed because she's obsolete. So they've got up there a little bit too quick. They will turn to port for 1 action point and go cruise speed, which is 4. Admiral Pissov in the Borodino, seeing some juicy targets on the starboard side, and he orders the Borodino to fire at the Chiyoda. The other 2 battleships will be firing at Mikasa. Borodino's -1 for firing because she's damaged, but Chiyoda is an armoured cruiser, therefore her defence factor is 4. Therefore it's 3-4. Well, that is 9-5. Not quite double, that would have been catastrophic, but Chiyoda takes 1 level of damage. And now Imperator Alexander II and Sisoi Veliki will open fire on Shikishima. 4-5 to the Alexander. It's another cracking hit. 10-7. Shikishima is damaged. So the Mikasa will open fire on the Borodino, supported by Shikishima. It's over 12 inches, but because of the support it's still +4, but defensive factor is 5. 7-9, no effect. And over with the cruisers, Naniwa will open fire at Borodino with Chiyoda in support. It's 5-all. That's no effect. And final part of the round, I should have done this earlier in the movement. The Fuji needs to do another morale test, which she hasn't passed. If she does pass it, then we can get some damage reduction done on her. But that ain't going to happen this turn. Looks like the Russians have got the upper hand in this battle so far. The Japanese just aren't in it. Old Itchicrotchi has done a runner. He's left his fleet on his own, and Pissov is having a laugh in the middle. Initiative remains with the Russians. Well, there we get the Japanese to move first. Right, battleship action points. 1. It's actually 2 because of the Admiral, because he's good. I'll say good. He's disappearing. So that's still not much cop. I'll do a morale roll for him. He hasn't passed it. So old Itchicrotchi has had enough of it by the looks of it. And he's off. Can't do any damage reduction either with those action points. Right, the other 2 will just carry on their merry way. I think they will turn, but go cruise speed. Meanwhile, the cruiser squadron will just continue on that heading cruise speed. Russians, battleship squadron, just the 1, and the cruisers 4. Let's do the cruisers first. Well, they will go cruise speed, and turn slightly to port. Whereas the battleships will turn to starboard and they'll just go their cruise speed. Looks like the Japanese cruiser squadron's getting ganged up on here. Okay, first of all then, Borodino and Imperator Alexander II are going to gang up on Chiyoda. Normally 4 attack factor for the Russians, but it's +1 because of the support. So it's 5-4 against Chiyoda, which is 7-5. Another level of damage. Chiyoda is now silenced. No firing. Morale roll. Needs a 3+, otherwise she's going away. She is withdrawing. The captain of the Chiyoda doesn't like it up him. What I'd like to say the Sisoi Veliki would join in, but because she's obsolete, range of the guns is too short and can't join in the carnage against the Chiyoda. However, she is just in range of Shikishima and will open fire. 4-5. Which is 9-8. Another level of damage. And she's silenced. This is not good for the Japanese, and certainly not good for Admiral Itchicrotchi. And I'm afraid, my little sons of Nippon, this is not finished yet. The Russian cruiser squadron is getting in on the action. Admiral Nakimov, supported by Bayan, will open fire on Izumo. 5-all. And that, I'm afraid, is 9-6. Izumo is damaged. It's a disaster for the Japanese. Their final effort will be Mikasa with the Shikishima supporting, open fire on Sisoi Veliki. But I've just realised Shikishima can't fire because she's silenced, so it's just Mikasa on her own. 4-5. And that's no effect. Poor shooting. And over here with the Japanese cruiser squadron, it's also a pitiful state. They are silenced. They're damaged. I mean, she's okay in the middle, Naniwa, who will open fire on Admiral Nakimov, supported by Izumo. It's 5-5. But again, look at that. Poor shooting, no effect. And that is the last Japanese effort. And there we have it, end of turn, and I'm afraid it's not good enough for the Japanese. They have too many ships crippled or silenced at the end of that turn, and they are going to disappear. Led by Itchicrotchi in his flagship. Not good enough, mate. No. So, I mean, look at that. Also silenced. And over here, Chiyoda was going to disappear and withdraw very soon afterwards, but the whole fleet has given up. Well done, the Russians. Look at that. Just 1 damage on the Borodino, and the rest of them are okay. They chugged their way through that. Well done, Pissov. You certainly pissed off the Japanese.